to another video log of my travels in the Izmir Province of Turkey. I'm John Cassinat as usual, and today we were supposed to leave our hotel in Kusadasi to visit the Greek island of Patmos, which is located about 30 miles south and east of Kusadasi, Turkey. Patmos is, of course, the island of John the Revelator's banishment and the place where he wrote the book of Revelation. We chartered a boat to take us from Kusadasi to Patmos and went down to the port where we went through customs. So technically we left the country of Turkey for a few minutes in the no man's land of duty free. Unfortunately, there were strong winds from the south and high sea swells that prevented us from leaving. The Coast Guard actually closed the port for small boats, so back to Turkey we went, and to the village of Sirince for some sightseeing. Now, Sirince is located about 9 kilometers from the ancient city of Ephesus. As of 2022, the population, not counting tourists, of course, was about 450, give or take a few goats and chickens that live in and amongst the locals. We were walking down one of the cobblestone streets and could smell the barnyard animals before we ever saw them. Here we are in a nice rustic Airbnb. The goat is looking at us and thinking to herself, and this is definitely a her, "What are you doing in my room?" So at any rate, the history of Sirince dates back to the Hellenistic period between 331 and 323 BC. But most of what you see in the village today is from the 1800s AD. In 1926, the name of the village was changed to Sirince, which means pleasant. Speaking of pleasant, here's a close encounter of a pleasant kind with my wife and our dueling cameras.
Thank you.
Say thank you.
I said thank you.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
There's the picture for which she's thanking me profusely. Today the village prospers through agriculture, including things like olive oil, peaches, wine, including homemade wines, tobacco and figs, as well as tourism. The reality of it is that tourism is the main source of income for the village. Just to give you an illustration of their capitalistic ways, Jan wanted to get some olive wood salad serving spoons, and so we stopped at this one place. And just for these couple of little spoons, they wanted 60 euros. Now, that's not Turkish lira, but euros. So, ouch on that one. I think we're going to pass, and we'll have to give up on salads for a while. Here's a brief history of Sirince since the decline of ancient Ephesus in the 15th century. The city prospered and grew at the time Ephesus was finally abandoned, and many Christians literally headed for the hills to escape Muslim invaders. By 1650 AD, however, there were only 18 tax-paying individuals, all of whom were Orthodox Christians. In 1699, an English priest by the name of Edmund Chisel visited and said everyone was Christian. Similarly, in 1832 and 33, a visitor by the name of Arundel visited and said there were 300 houses, all of them Greek. The principal language was Turkish, and the women dressed in the Turkish manner, covering their faces. The men were all armed as the Turks with pistols and vatagan, which is a long knife. The population was probably 1,500 persons. By 1908 and 1909, more than 1,000 houses were all inhabited by Greek Orthodox Christians. The mother tongue was Turkish, spoken with an ancient dialect. The Ottoman administration continued until 1990. At that time, the invading Greek army took control and remained until 1922. Until the 1950s, the population remained about 2,000 to 3,000 people, but families increasingly moved to Selçuk. By this time, however, most of these families were Turkish and were Muslims. That I'll explain why that is the case in a couple of minutes. In the 1990s, a well-known Istanbul linguist and his wife settled in Sirince. By that time, the city was semi-derelict and in very poor condition. they had the village declared a National Heritage Site and undertook to renovate ruined historic houses. Several of the renovated village houses were converted into a highly acclaimed hotel. Other villagers have restored their homes and operate them as small hotels, probably something kind of like a B&B. We observed some houses where these renovations were apparently occurring. If you notice the framing going on with the diamond studs, there's nothing like this I've ever seen in the United States. Notice how the new construction is also cantilevered over the old construction so they get more floor space in the new area they're constructing. This was pretty common in a number of houses we saw here in Sirince. Here are just a few examples of many that we saw where you have this cantilevered second floor over the old construction on the first floor by way of illustration. Sirince acquired worldwide fame when tourists flocked to the village in December 2012 to witness the Mayan apocalypse of all things. The New Age mystics believed that the positive energy from the city would aid in the catastrophe that was expected at the end of 2012. For most of the rest of this video, I'm going to show you the quaint sights and scenes of this village. Most of what you see exemplifies Christian architecture from the time of the Ottoman Empire, that is Byzantine architecture with a Greek Orthodox flair. Then, of course, there is the Byzantine architecture with an American twist, as you can see in these pictures of the American restaurant of all things. So as you look at many of the other photos, you may think that I have this door fetish. I don't, but Jan does. But I have to admit that the doors that I saw in the city kind of grew on me, and each has its own character and charm. And that's part of the Sirince experience. So as you look at the photos, I'm going to talk about a remarkable event dating back to World War I, when the population in Sirince, which was mostly Greek Orthodox Christian, but that was an anomaly because that is, you had this Christian village living and worshiping in the Ottoman Empire that was more than 95% Muslim. Now, back in that day, there were two Christian churches in the village that go back to the Byzantine era. The more significant of the two was the St. John the Baptist Church. It includes a house for the priest and a fountain with a small courtyard. There are Byzantine frescoes, meaning frescoes from the era after Constantine the Great. The original church was destroyed and then rebuilt in 1805. It was then restored between the years 1988 and 1993, and again in 2015 and 2016. So now let me come back to the event that I referred to a moment ago that I'm going to take the time to explain in some detail. That concerned the 1923 population exchange agreement between Turkey and Greece. The agreement was signed in Switzerland between Greece and Turkey in the aftermath of World War I. As part of this agreement, 1.2 million Greek Muslims were forced to move from Greece to Turkey, and about 500,000 Greek Christians in Asia Minor or in Turkey were forced to move to Greece. So a total of about 1.6 million people were denaturalized from their homelands. The first article of the agreement states, quote, "As from 1st May 1923, there shall take place a compulsory exchange of Turkish nationals of the Greek Orthodox religion established in Turkish territory and of Greek nationals of the Muslim religion established in Greek territory." Close quote. This agreement was seen as a way to normalize relations between the countries and the people. The Greek and Christian inhabitants of Turkey had been massacred in World War I and in the aftermath of that war. So Greece saw this as a way to provide propertyless Greek Orthodox refugees with land in the country of Greece. That is, if we get rid of the Muslims in Greece, then we're going to have a place for all of these Greek Christians that are fleeing as refugees from Turkey. Turkey, for its part, saw this as a way to create an ethnically pure homeland for Turks, which is to say, Turkish Muslims. So the compulsory population exchange was not based on language and ethnicity, but upon religious identity. So on the one hand, you had the indigenous Orthodox Christian peoples of Turkey, and on the other hand, you had the native Muslims living in Greece. These were native peoples, citizens, even veterans of the very state which was in the process of expelling them. None of them had a voice in the language and effect of this agreement. This entire situation presents an interesting question that you might ask yourself today, and that is, what would you do if you were living back then? You're facing deportation from your homeland for being a Christian, so what are you going to say and what are you going to do? Devin, our tour guide, kind of told us about some situations about people that didn't want to move, and so if they didn't want to, they would go to their neighbor and ask their neighbor to swear for them that they had converted to Islam. The same problem was encountered by the early Christians in the 1st century AD. If you were Christian and you wouldn't deny it, then you were executed. But if you denied it, you basically were allowed to live. And so the more things changed, the more they seemed to stay the same. So now the question is, what do you do in your individual lives when you're faced with a choice between an ardent faith in Jesus Christ demonstrated by your actions and doing things that would tend to suggest that you are not ardent in your faith and therefore aren't going to be subject to some of the persecutions and ramifications of life that exist in the world today? So at any rate, let's get back to the treaty for just a moment. The proponents of the treaty argued that this prevented another potential genocide of Greek Orthodox Christians living in Turkey. At the end of 1922, the vast majority of Greeks had already fled Turkey due to genocide against them. The Ottomans repeatedly massacred Greek Christian minorities between 1914 and 1922. The Ionian Greek Ottoman citizens also were fleeing from Greece after the Greco-Turkish War. This came after World War I, when the Allied forces had authorized a Greek zone of occupation in the defeated Ottoman Empire. The Greek occupation was intended to protect Christian minorities, but it actually led to additional massacres in the Ottoman zone. There were also reprisal killings of Muslims in Greece. If we look some of the statistics, the estimates are that the Ottoman Greeks killed between 1914 and 1923 totaled 300,000 to 900,000 people. The Christian population of Turkey was reduced from 4.4 million in 1912 to just 700,000 by 1924, and by the end of the war, 50% of all pre-war Christians in Turkey had been killed. In the modern times, we have the following statistics that the Christians in Turkey declined from about 20 to 25% in 1914 to 3 to 5.5% in 1927, and today approximately 0.3 to 0.4% of the people in Turkey are Christians, and that equates to about 200,000 to 300,000 people. So the population exchange was messy and dangerous for many, and if the goal of the exchange was to achieve ethnic national homogeneity, then this was achieved by both Turkey and Greece. Individually, however, it was devastating for people on every possible level. That's religiously, economically, linguistically, and ethnically. It's not unlike the pioneers who were uprooted from their homes in Missouri and then again in Nauvoo, Illinois, where they had to move with everything they could strap to their backs to a strange new country. So these people who were part of the population exchange had to register, value, liquidate property that they were forced to abandon, and then they had to try and secure payment of their just claims for their lost property. And essentially all of the possessions they left in Greece automatically belonged to the Greek state. All the possessions left by people in Turkey belonged automatically to the Turkish state, and most of the property was declared to be abandoned, and their former owners were labeled as fugitives. So you get a sense of how this whole claim process was probably not a particularly fair one, and a lot of the real property of many Greeks was declared unclaimed. So the greater part of it was sold at some nominal value. So the bottom line is it was economically devastating for these people who left behind their possessions. Furthermore, it was not an even trade really among the people, because the possessions left by the Greek Orthodox people in Turkey was significantly greater. As a result of the population exchange agreement, most residents today in the city or village of Sirince are Muslim, but I would not say they are Orthodox Muslim, and it's certainly not obvious by the dress of most residents whether they are Muslim or Greek Orthodox. They warmly welcome the tourists, especially the shop owners, and in the faces of some, it seems like you can see the face of their history. If all these doors could talk, what a story they surely would tell, but since they don't and won't, we'll just have to use our imagination as the story of the doors continues to unfold in this video log. So thanks for being with me today to experience the sights and sounds of Sirince. Since we couldn't take a boat to Patmos and from thence to Athens, we'll be traveling to Athens by direct flight from Izmir. We got lucky and got an upgrade to business class, which included some nice R&R time in a cozy transit lounge before the short flight to the Greek mainland. Now you might be thinking that my next video log will come from Athens, but we're actually going to take a detour to the ancient city of Smyrna, which was the second city of the 7 cities that John wrote to in the book of Revelation. So I will next see you at the Smyrna Agora. In the meantime, thanks for watching, subscribing, sharing, and following my continuing adventures.